and welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask all members and officers have their microphone on mute until they wish or are invited to speak. We have a new member present today, Mrs. Sue Jordan, and welcome. So it'd be useful for members of the committee to introduce themselves. So if I start on my right-hand side with Ross, and if you introduce yourself, we'll go right the way around.
Thank you, Chair. So my name is Ross, member for Mallory, which is in Hinkley and Bosworth, in sort of West Leicestershire. Welcome to the committee and the council.
Thank you, Ross. My name's Mark Frisbee. I'm representing Melton Mowbray West. Welcome to the committee.
With my coffee then. Hello, I'm Brenda Seaton. I'm a member for Thurmaston Ridgemere. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gatroya from Orby Borough Council. Sorry, not Borough County Council. Thank you.
Of course, sorry. Yeah, I'm Sharon Cook. I'm Assistant Director in Children and Family Services for Targeted Early Help and Children's Social Care. Councillor Deborah Taylor, representing the Forest Ward, and I'm the lead member for Children and Families.
Jane Moore, Director of Children and Family Services for Leicestershire County Council.
Alison Bradley, Assistant Director for Education and Centre for Leicestershire. Hi, Jenny Lawrence, Finance Business Partner for Schools and High Needs.
Hi, Nurinda Samaria, CFS Finance Business Partner.
Not with it today. I'm Max. I'm from Loughborough Northwest.
Hello, my name is Robert Martin. I'm a representative of Special School Governors.
Canon Lewis is in the screen for us.
Hello, Carolyn Lewis, Darson Director of Education. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much and welcome. And I'm Hilary Fryer and I represent, my division is Quorn and Barrow. Thank you. So, and I have received apologies from Cabinet Support Member Mr. Smith for today's meeting. The first item on today's agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of November. I move that these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Mr. Frisbee. Agenda item 2 is question time, and I have received 2 questions today. The first is from Ms. Sue Whiting, who is present in the meeting. The question and its response have been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of the meeting and will be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on these. I will now invite Mrs. Whiting to ask a supplementary question if you have one. And I would remind you that your supplementary question should be to clarify the reply you have been given and should not raise any more issues. Welcome, Mrs. Whiting.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the answer, especially the numbers at Part C. My supplementary question is because I very specifically asked in A and how many children were working below year 5 have been allocated a mainstream place, and in B that I've been asked again, but the same question, but working below Key Stage 2, and your answer seems to be the same for both. So I'm not sure whether there are 428 Year 6 children with an EHCP and named with a name placed by 5th of February, who are working below Year 5, or if there's another 428 children who are working at Key Stage 1. If the information on curriculum levels is only held in schools, how can the EHCP's provision be accurate and appropriate? Thank you.
I will ask the officers to respond if they're able. Thank you. Mrs. Whiting, turn your microphone off, please.
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Whiting, and apologies, the response wasn't clear. So just to be clear, there are in total 428 children in Year 6 who have an education, health and care plan. At the moment, we are working through all of those children to make sure that they have a named place by the 15th of February deadline. So that's the total number. It's not 428 plus 428. In relation to the curriculum levels, for us to answer that question, and indeed you're right, the HCP does detail the attainment levels of children. It details all of the needs of children. We would have to go into every single one of those 428 plans in order to answer the detail of that question. So the way in which we allocate a place is by looking at the education, health and care plan, looking at what the plan says the needs are, and then allocating a place. So indeed, the detail about the education levels or curriculum levels is held at a school level. So it's not that we don't know it when we're looking at the individual children in order to place them, it's that it's not information that we can pull off as a local authority. That is what's held at a school level.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Whiting. The second question is from Mr. David Warwick. Thank you, Mr. Warwick. And the question and its response have been circulated to members. Start of the meeting and will be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is held on this questionnaire. Mr. Warwick, I'd like to invite you to ask your supplementary question.
Thank you.
You have one.
Yeah. So in the response I received, it says that the average time taken to complete EHCP assessment in Leicestershire is currently around 35 weeks, reduced from previous figure of 42 weeks. My supplementary question is, according to the Special Needs Jungle Local Authority Hall of Shame, Leicestershire are 5th most likely to refuse an EHC needs assessment and top least likely to meet the EHCP 20-week deadline with 3% and 40% respectively. My supplementary question is, does the 35-week period quoted include those applications which are refused or rejected but then taken to tribunal successfully by the parents and the guardians at tribunal? And if not, what is the average time, including this, and how many tribunal applications in Leicestershire are successful? That's A. And in relation to question B, from the Cabinet report that was presented to Cabinet on June the 23rd of 23, there is a report from a diagnostic review held by Newton Europe consultancy engaged through a competitive tendering process. In that, they state there were opportunities for 34% of children and young people with an EHCP in mainstream provision to have their needs met without an EHCP. So my supplementary question is, how, well, my members who work in schools, teaching assistants, business managers, etc. They want to know how, with rising numbers of children presenting with high needs and challenging behaviours, are support staff and or the school budget supposed to cope if 34% of children on EHCPs have their EHCP withdrawn? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask the officers. Is it coming to you, Jane? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just in response to the first question, the average time taken to complete an education, health and care plan includes all of the education, health and care plan assessments that are undertaken. So yes, it does include those plans that are instructed under tribunal. The time taken, so the 35 weeks, is the time taken from the point at which the EHCP assessment was agreed until its completion. In respect of the second part of that question around how many tribunal applications in Leicestershire were successful, what we know is that in 2023, 94, so nearly 95% of tribunals ruled against the local authority. So in favour of the parent. I haven't got the breakdown of how many of those were around assessments, but the majority of tribunals rule against the local authority. In relation to the second question, so the deep dive into SEND services that we've outlined in the papers today took place at the beginning of the programme, and it reviewed the journey of children and young people who were in non-mainstream settings, and it was focused on opportunities for improved outcomes for those children, and certainly looked at what could have been done earlier on in the education journey. So across mainstream schools, we know that there's a whole range of support that's available to support children with special educational needs and disabilities without the need for an education, health and care plan. And the deep dive that took place did look at the journey of those children who had an education, health and care plan in mainstream schools, but on some occasion did identify that those needs could have been met either earlier or without an education, health and care plan. And there's a wealth of resource within schools and expertise in ordinarily available mainstream provision that does and can support children with SEND outside of an EHCP. Now, what that data doesn't say is that we are going to remove EHCPs from children that have them. It was about looking at the journey of children and whether or not there were things that could have been done differently for those children, which meant that their needs could have been met earlier or indeed without an education, health and care plan. Things like through SEND support and other things that are available within schools.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Warwick. You're welcome to remain in the meeting, or if you wish to leave, we quite understand. Thank you. Right, we move on to item 3. I've received no questions from members. Item 4, I have no urgent items. And 5, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest? Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of the Leicestershire Centre, I work strategically with the local authority on certain specific elements of the TESOL programme that are defined in the TESOL programme section. So we'll not be taking part in that area of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Is there anybody else that wishes to declare any interest? No, thank you. Item 6. A declaration to party whip. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? I believe so. And item 7, I have not received any petitions. So our first substantive of the meeting today is the MTFS, which starts on page 11 of your agenda pack. You've all been given a piece of paper with the outline of how we will go through the MTFS. We do this every time we get it. So it's divided into certain sections. After each section, I will invite any further questions or comments from members of the committee, the cabinet lead member and officers on the revenue budget. So we will now move on to the revenue budget, which starts on page 12, and we're looking at paragraphs 10 to 24. And are you leading on this, Jane? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report set out today provides information on the proposed 2024 to 27-28 medium-term financial strategy as it relates to the Children and Family Services Department. In terms of background, the MTFS is set out in the report that went to Cabinet on the 19th of December, and then Cabinet will then consider the comments of Overview and Scrutiny today in responses from the wider consultation at its meeting on the 9th of February, and the County Council will meet on the 21st of February to consider the full MTFS. Moving on to look at the transforming the way the department works, the demand across children's services has continued to increase, and we're projecting a growth of around about 41 million over the period of the MTFS. And this is in order to meet the children and family services needs before intervention arising from demographic growth and the increased need for social care. So in response to these pressures, the department has in recent years embarked on a number of different transformation programmes, including defining children's services for the future and transforming SEND and inclusion. And these programmes are both focused on ensuring positive outcomes for children and families, as well as responding to the financial pressures through the MTFS. Other savings are being delivered through partnerships such as the Children's Innovation Partnership with Barnardo's and Service Redesign. And across the organisation, there are several cross-cutting corporate-led programmes that have emerged to enhance the efficiency of the authority. So the Prevention Review, the Customer Programme Review, the Sustainable Support Services Programme and Ways of Working are all looking and acting as key enablers to support the department's service activities in the most cost-effective and efficient manner. In terms of the main programmes of transformational work in children and family services, the Transforming SEND and Inclusion programme, and there is a full paper on this programme on the next agenda item, is the change programme that is focused on special educational needs and inclusion. And it's focusing on taking a whole system approach to support inclusion in mainstream schools wherever possible and improve services for children with special educational needs and disabilities. The Defining Children and Family Services for the Future programme is a follow-on programme from our first programme, which worked intensively with consultants from Newton Europe to develop and future-proof the department services so that the right interventions are delivered at the right time and in the right way for children and families, and ensuring as well that we are continuing to be financially stable going forwards. The Children's Innovation Partnership is our partnership with Barnardo's that is looking at alternative service delivery models for children in residential provision. And then lastly, the financial control measures that have been introduced across the organisation and giving the increasingly challenging financial outlook across the organisation, there has now been a need to increase financial controls across all of the departments. And those areas of focus are set out in paragraph 22 and are being applied across the children and family services as well. We have been undertaking some reviews around where spend can be reduced or indeed stopped, and we've now introduced new approval processes as well, including sign-off by departmental directors. In relation to the proposed revenue budget, the table on page 15 sets out the proposed 24-25 revenue budget and also the provisional budgets for the next 4 years. There is more detail in Appendix A of the breakdown of the proposed spend across the department. It shows that the net provisional budget for 24-25 is 117,107,000. And detailed service budgets have been compiled on the basis of no pay or price inflation, and a central contingency is being held, which will be allocated to services where necessary. And budget transfers to cover additional costs associated with the 23-24 pay award are still to be finalised, but are likely to be reflected in the final MTFS report to Cabinet. And then in relation to other changes and transfers, there are net budget transfers totaling 2.5 million, which majority relate to the output of the Children and Family Services fee review. And then we've categorised the growth and savings as those items that are unchanged from the previous MTFS and those items that are included in the previous MTFS, but we have made amendments to them. And we've also classified savings as either transformational department, depending on whether the savings are seen as an efficiency or a service reduction, or indeed a mixture of both. I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now open it to comments and questions from the committee and Mr. Hunt.
Thanks. Just a very quick point about financial controls. You say they're increasing the financial controls. First time it's been down there as a specific item on this. It would be interesting to know in a year's time how we've got on with these.
Jane?
Yeah, so there is reviews are being undertaken around the implementation of the financial controls across the organisation. We have had a number of financial control measures in the Children and Families Department for a number of years now. These are increased controls as a result of the financial challenges, but yes, they will be reviewed to see both the effectiveness and whether or not they need to be tightened.
Is that all right, Mr. Hunt? Did you want to come back? Would you like to turn your microphone off, please? Thank you very much. Hopefully before then. Anybody else got any comments on that section? Does any of the other officers currently? No? We'll move on then. So Jane, we're now moving on to, as I understand, growth, pages 15 to 21, paragraphs 30 to 57. Thank you.
Thank you. So the growth over the next 4 years and the department budget totals 41.3 million, and this is mainly due to pressures within social care placements arising from increased numbers of looked after children, predominantly those children who arrive here as unaccompanied asylum seekers, as well as significant increase in the cost of placements for children who are looked after and care leavers. The details for each growth item are summarised in the table on page 16. And I'll go through each of them in a little bit more detail as well. So the first growth line relates to our social care placements, and you can see that we are projecting a growth of 13.7 million, rising to 39.8 million over the period of the MTFS. The placement budget comprises of a variety of settings to look after those children that, as part of our statutory duties to safeguard them, are not able to live at home and therefore come into our care. This significant growth pressure relates largely to an increasing cost of that placement mix. We do know that the demand, or certainly increase in the number of non-asylum seeking looked after children in Leicestershire, is beginning to stabilise, and that's very much aligning to the position nationally as well. But what we are seeing is a significant change in the average cost of the most costly provision type, and the cost of residential provision in particular, and certainly the unit cost or the weekly cost of those provision for young people. There are two other contributing factors as well that are impacting on the rising of that cost provision, and one is the cohort of children. We are seeing an increase in the complexity of those children that come into our care, and particularly in terms of the age of those young people, but also some of the issues that they are facing, which then results in some of the complexities for them that require residential placements. And the second contributing factor is market pressures and sufficiency. There is a national lack of provider capacity and extreme volatility in the market that has led to a significant increase in the cost of new placements compared to those ones that are currently ending. It has resulted in a use of some high cost placements. That's placements that are costing us over £10,000 a week, and also a lack of step down opportunities from residential provision. So we do have a number of children who are currently living in residential provision, but actually are ready for family-based placement, but we don't have the capacity within our family-based placement system to be able to step those children down. Currently, the average weekly cost for residential placements is high. It's increased from £4,800 per week to £5,800 a week. So that's a 21% increase over the last 12 months. We also know that there's a higher percentage of very costly placements, so those ones that are costing us over £7,000 plus a week, that we've seen increase over more recent years. Over the last year, we've had an 18.7% increase in the cost of the top 10 highest cost placements. In 22-23, we only had 2 children who were in a weekly placement that cost us over £10,000 a week. Since April 23, 9 of the 10 highest cost children have been in a place that's costing us over £10,000 a week, and 4 of which are significantly higher than that. And the profile of this costly placement is a mix of both complexity of need, market conditions and sufficiency issues, so that there aren't enough places for those most complex children, or those children that require such additional support. There is a national trend of increasing numbers of children and young people in care. We know that over the last year, there's been a national increase of around about 4% of children entering care. As I said earlier, the increase in numbers of non-UASC children in entering care in Leicestershire has stabilised, but we are seeing a significant challenge around unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And you can see in paragraph 39, we've set out that our per 10,000 population of children in care remains below the comparator authorities. The other impact of on weekly costs is the level of needs I've talked about, but in particular a kind of national trend of older young people who are coming into care with an increasingly complex range of needs that we need to be able to meet and meet safely as well, and being able to find placements for those children is increasingly challenging. The next area of growth is around frontline social care staff and making sure that we have the right number of staff in order to manage the numbers of children that we have responsibility for. And you can see that we're projecting no growth in the first year of the MTFS, but that rises to 350,000 of projected growth over the period of the MTFS. We do need to invest in additional frontline staff capacity to make sure that we have manageable and appropriate caseloads for our children in order to both meet our statutory duties but also meet the needs of those children for whom we have responsibility to work with. The growth does provide for increase in demand, and although we are seeing a levelling of demand across child protection and child in care, actually what we are seeing is an increased complexity of the management and certainly support of those cases. It should be noted that this is a reduced growth projection. It's around about 2.5 million reduced growth projection, because we were in previous years projecting an increase in numbers and therefore an increasing need for social care staff. We do know that nationally there's a continued shortage of social workers staff, which is projected to worsen, and research is showing that there are less people coming into the social care profession and those not remaining in frontline social work as well. And we also know that there's still growing numbers or high numbers of people who are moving into agency work as well. So we know that all of these issues are still prevalent in Leicestershire, but there has been some very positive recruitment and retention activities across the services. We have seen an increasing number of staff undertaking the apprenticeship social work courses. We've seen a real positive international social worker recruitment, and we are paying some market premier payments to make sure that we are in line with similar posts across other organisations across the region. Another growth area is the work that we the growth following the Transforming Send and Inclusion work, and around making sure that that work remains sustainable. The programme, and you'll hear in the next paper, is now well into its implementation stage, with the majority of those design changes having been implemented across all of the areas that we wanted to effect change on. The programme has considered the workload and performance within the Special Educational Needs and Assessment Service. That service is responsible for undertaking the statutory assessment and the review of education, health and care plans as well. And the review identified that at the moment, as you know, we are failing to achieve our statutory duties across both assessments and review periods as well. We have considered and undertaken a review of the Special Educational Needs and Assessment Service, as well as looking at the required capacity as well. And the growth then sets out the required capacity in order to increase the staffing, so increasing case manager numbers and management capacity in order to meet our statutory duties and improve timeliness as well. The growth funding will also sit alongside the changes that we are looking at within our educational psychology service to make sure that we're able to manage the workloads and indeed make sure that assessments are done on time as well. Really key areas for the Transforming Send and Inclusion programme remain around improving timeliness, improving communication, and making sure that every child gets the right support at the right time and the placements that they need, and will support them as well. But again, you'll hear more about that in the next paper. And we do know what's included in this growth is that the achievement of some of those benefits within the Transforming Send and Inclusion is dependent on the delivery of the growth, or is dependent on the growth that has been built in. The fourth area of growth is around our unaccompanied asylum seeking children, and we are projecting quite significant growth in this area around both increased demand and also cost of placements for those children and young people. It's largely due to the rapid increase in the number of unaccompanied asylum seeking children who have arrived in Leicestershire and become our responsibility. We've seen a particular rise in the number of children who are coming into the authority through adult hotels. So those are the children who arrive as an adult or are assessed as an adult by Home Office. They arrive at one of the hotels that are being accommodated, and then they declare themselves as children. And following assessment, they are indeed children and need to be dealt with as children or as unaccompanied asylum seeking children. That's led to a significant increase in the number of children for which the county council is responsible for, and therefore need to either support but also accommodate as well. We've currently got 130 unaccompanied asylum seeking children in our care. That's a 117% increase since 31st of March in 2022, and we've got 135 over 18 unaccompanied asylum seekers, young people, which represents a 96% increase in those numbers since March 2022. So you can see quite significant increase, and they particularly for the care leavers, there is a significantly reduced funding rate that is received from Home Office. So the rates received from Home Office do not cover the costs of supporting these children. And then the final area of growth is around demand management. So we've projected about 1.1 million rising to 2.3 million over the period of the MTFS. This is a growth reduction target to mitigate those big growth, demand-led growth areas that I've just given an overview. It does represent a 10% of the increase in growth requirements compared to the 23-27 MTFS, and you'll note from the report that we are projecting a significant increase in growth compared to last year's MTFS. This is about us seeking to reduce that increased growth. Chair, I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any? Mr. Hunt?
Just another quick one. I was expecting to see the deficit and projections in Appendix A. I can't see them. That's probably my fault. But it's projected to rise to over 100 million. It's quite soon. Yeah. Should it be here? I mean, is there a way in which we can track it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If it's okay, I'll pick that up under the high needs block. So paragraphs 92 to 98, I can pick that up there, the details set out there. I think it's on pages 29 to 32.
Thank you. Jane, could I just ask for a bit of clarification on paragraph 55? There are 130 unaccompanied children in care. Oh, I see. But then it says under over 18 is 135. So that just slightly confused me. So are we talking about the under 18s are 130 and the up to 25, the 18 to 25, are 135. So actually under this whole unaccompanied children, young adult, it's actually worked out at 265. Am I reading that right? Thank you.
Yes, that's right. So the 130 are those children who are classified as in care. And then we have the over 18s, which we classify as care leavers. So you're right, in total, there are 265 children and young people who would be classified as unaccompanied asylum seeking children.
Thank you very much. Anyone else had any comments they'd like to make on that before we move on? Mrs. Taylor.
Just to add to that section, just so committee are aware, a lot of those over 18s are care leavers, haven't had their asylum situation approved by the government or unapproved by the government. So we are supporting them as if they were in care because they have no way of supporting themselves without any status at all. And a lot of them are, we have a few that are over 25 that we are supporting because they can't work, they can't claim benefits, they can't live independently because they have no asylum status. So I have written to the Secretary of State over this that you as care leavers need to have their asylum seeking applications sorted out as soon as possible. So, because this is costing us a lot of money, and they are young people that want to work, they want to study, they want to get on in life, they want to settle, they don't want to be in our care, but they have no other option because of their asylum status.
Thank you very much. Anyone else said nothing? Right. So we now move on to savings from pages 21 to 25, paragraphs 58 to 80. And are you leading on this as well, Jane? Thank you.
Thank you. So the details of the proposed savings for the local authority budget are set out in the table at paragraph 59. They total 2.3 million worth of savings in 24-25, rising to 13.5 million over the period of the MTFS. On top of that, the MTFS also includes the need to ensure sustainable services for those children with special educational needs and disabilities through the high needs block. And we're forecasting cost reductions in that area of the budget of around about 41 million over the period of the MTFS. So if I just take you briefly through each of the savings areas, the first one is the Children's Innovation Partnership, which is our residential redesign programme, and we're projecting savings of 1 million rising to 1.5 million over the period of the MTFS. So this programme is designed to make sure we can improve outcomes for those children who are within our care, in particular those children who are in residential provision. And the ambition of this programme is to create up to 23 placements over the next 5 years for children within Leicestershire as part of the residential redesign strategy. We know that over the last few years, the need for residential care has pretty much stabilised, but we have been solely reliant on the private sector to support those children and young people. So we've invested 5.96 capital over the life of this programme, of which there is £2 million worth of money that's come from the DFE. And the idea is that we are essentially buying children's homes that Bernardo's will run in partnership with us for our children. So we will then have 27 places within Leicestershire that our children are able to live in as part of the residential provision as alternatives to those private places. And we've detailed in paragraph 65 the progress of those homes. We're really pleased we've got 2 of those homes open now, and with children and certainly parent and child placement as well in living in those. So really, really positive, and we continue to work on that strategy to increase the number of in-house residential provision that we have. The next saving line is around the departmental efficiency modelling redesign in response very much to those national and local challenges around recruiting and retaining social workers. We've had a look at reviewing the roles and responsibilities across the care pathway, so the pathway that children move through the department, as well as looking at things like thresholds for support and making sure that support is provided by the most appropriate resource for families. This is likely to result in a greater use of non-qualified staff who can add significant value and input into the families alongside that social work intervention as well. The next saving line is our Defining Children and Family Services for the Future Phase 2. And that is building on the success of the Defining Children's Family Services Phase 1 programme, where we undertook a number of initiatives to both stabilise demand but also make sure that children had the right services in the right place. The second phase of this programme includes a number of initiatives, including looking at improved sufficiency of homes for those children who are leaving our care, a review of our offer for short breaks for children with disabilities, looking at those families where we have recurrent removals of children to see whether there's any intervention that we can do to reduce the need to recurrently remove children, and also looking at smarter ways of working. So looking at all savings from all non-placement and social care budgets, and looking at wider efficiencies as well. The next area of savings is, and we've undertaken a review of our therapeutic services and essentially reorganised how we deliver that, and in turn taken out some savings. So we've continued to support the needs of children, but we're doing it in quite a different way that's meant that we can save some money. The next line of savings is around reducing the cost of care through growing our internal family-based placements. So a real focus on avoiding placements entering more costly provision by looking at how we can increase our internal foster care replacements, how we can make sure we're really fully utilising our internal foster placements, how we can increase special guardianship orders, looking at our domestic abuse offer and how we can support those families impacted by domestic abuse, and looking at enablement for those children with a disability as well. And then the sixth line of the savings is around smarter commissioning and procurement. And as I've detailed, we are seeing increasing costs around placement sufficiency and certainly the unit cost of placements across the authority. We do have a duty to make sure that we've got sufficient care for our children. That doesn't just include providing accommodation, but it also means that we need to make sure it's the right accommodation for our children. We deliver these duties through our commissioning service, and we know that we need to do some work there in terms of how we essentially do better commissioning for our children to kind of manage some of those spiralling costs nationally. So we've detailed in paragraph 76 what that defining 3 work stream will include, and it includes a review of the commissioning service. It does involve introducing some new roles into that service to make sure that we can realign resources and make sure that we can undertake commissioning in a much smarter way as well, and also look at how we engage with the market to think about what provision we buy for our children and young people. And the last area of savings within the budget is around how we can look at the service following the hopeful reduction in demand, but also in our tribunals as well. At the moment, we do have a lot of tribunals, and we're looking at how we can avoid tribunals by working earlier with families, and hopefully then reduce the cost of us needing to deal with tribunals as well. And then the last area, we've detailed some savings under development. So these are being looked at alongside those savings that are set out within the MTFS. We are looking at how we can expand our establishment modelling and dynamic modelling resource, and we're looking at how we can review our section 106 processes, how we centralise budgets, and also looking at what the next phases are around our defining children and family services, so looking at our social care services in a bit more detail. We are doing quite a lot of work on those, and once they're identified and quantified, they could be prioritised and based, and we can then understand based on amount of savings, deliverability, and impact as well. So again, Chair, I'll pause there.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions, comments they'd like to make? Mrs. Jordan.
Are there only 27 children that are looked after in residential care? Is that right? Or am I confused?
No, there aren't. No, it's a good question. So we've got around about 70 children who are in residential provision. And what we're doing as part of the programme that I identified through the Children's Innovation Programme is essentially increasing the amount of places that we have in Leicestershire that are our own homes. And based on the projection of need and good cost benefit, we've projected to, or we are planning to put 27 places in. So that'll be 27 children that would live within our homes as opposed to private providers. But it won't be all of our children. We will still use the private market as well to meet need.
Are the children in residential homes near where they live, or are they taken to somewhere? Because when we were out and about in Glenparva, we saw staff from Leicestershire County Council who were looking at a house to use as a residential property for children who looked after children, and they just wondered, you know, whether that would be going ahead with, and what would happen. Okay.
So part of the Children's Innovation Partnership strategy is about building or having homes that mean that children can live within their communities. So it's an absolute kind of wish of ours to make sure that those children that we have within our care who live within residential provision live within their communities, which is why we are kind of buying homes within Leicestershire and creating homes within Leicestershire. So yes, we have been out and looked at a number of properties to see whether they're suitable for our children. I don't know whether or not we've bought the Glenparva home, but we're out at the moment looking at all sorts of homes just to see whether they're suitable to be homes for our children, essentially.
Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just sort of drawn and fascinated by this ongoing process of tribunal. forgive me if it's buried somewhere in my documentation. I've not found it, but I assume that's initiated through courts. How's that funded? Does the parents, the family, fund that initial, or do we absorb that? I'm just trying to work out, because that it seems to be like churn going round and round and round. I can imagine anything to do with litigation is hugely expensive. So do we fund that, or do the parents fund that initially? Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Chair.
So the tribunal process is so as a county council, we would essentially pay our costs for going to tribunal. So just to go back a phase, the tribunal process is used where parents don't agree with the decision that we've come to. So it's the right of appeal. So it's the right process where people can go and say, we don't agree with what you said, or we don't agree with you not assessing, or we don't agree that you have named this placement. So it's the right process. So parents can ask to go to tribunal, and the tribunal then makes a decision. The costs of the local authority going and being represented at tribunal fall to the local authority. If the parents are seeking support, then the cost would fall to them. Part of the point I was making earlier around some of the savings is what we as a local authority need to do to avoid going to tribunal, and that's the work that we're doing at the moment to look at what we can do earlier on to mean that parents don't have to go through that lengthy process of kind of battling through a tribunal. And as I said, in terms of our figures, the majority of times the tribunal overrules in favour of the parent. So we're looking at the moment about what we need to do to avoid having to go through that lengthy process.
So effectively, Jane, just to clarify, we are funding or backfilling funding to essentially prosecute ourselves. Is that what, am I reading that correctly? We're paying all the, is it a legal process that actually goes into a court that the county council picks the tab up at the end of the day for? Sorry if I'm overcomplicating. I'm just, to clarify, it'd be useful to know that.
I think it's more like we're defending ourselves as opposed to prosecuting ourselves. The tribunal services run nationally, so we don't fund the tribunal service. It's a national service, sorry, it operates from a single point. It does cost us for tribunals because it costs officer time. So it's costing us at the moment to defend our position. Which is the point I was making around, are there things that we can do earlier to mean that we can avoid getting into that kind of antagonistic situation. So it's not a locally run system, it's a nationally run system that deals with all tribunals across all local authorities, but it does cost us as a local authority because it costs us to defend our position at the tribunal.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane. Thank you both.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up couple of questions on a couple of things, Jane. You said that most of the tribunals that go to disagreements with the decision are any of them to do with the delay in coming to a decision. Because obviously that seems to be where we're struggling as well quite a lot.
No, those are essentially resulting in complaints. So parents will go to tribunal where they don't agree with our decision. So if they don't agree that where we've said we're not going to undertake an assessment, they could go to tribunal. That's the majority of the tribunal numbers. If they don't agree with the placement that we've named, they can go to tribunal, or if they don't agree with some of the sections as well. So it's essentially where there's a disagreement. The issue of timeliness is resulting in a significant number of complaints, understandably, both from parents who are saying, you're taking too long to assess our child and therefore provision's not in place. So that doesn't go through the tribunal process, but it does come to us as a result of complaints.
Thank you for clarifying that. And just to follow up on Councillor Jordan's question as well. So roughly about, if we followed through with the savings and rather than going to the private market, which has been quite volatile over the last couple of years, I think you said it's about 20% increase in private placements. So we're looking to fund our own where we can have children in our own homes. And we're looking to about half of the children that we have in homes. Is that right, you said? Once the 70F is done, are you going to look to expand that? Maybe to have all of the children that we look after?
Yeah, so what we've worked out is essentially the cost of us delivering our own children's homes is less, well, it's two things. It's less than the cost of us buying private provision, but also it's a fixed rate. So one of the challenges we have within the private market is that we would pay a weekly rate, and then if there are some challenges, we might then add on more costs. So it's much more flexible or fluctuating costs within the private market. So the benefit of having our own provision is that it's our homes for our children, but also it's much more of a fixed rate, so we know what we're paying. In terms of the next stages, at the moment our plan goes over 3 phases over a number of years. So at the moment we are just looking at developing those 27 places. It's an extremely complex process opening children's homes for our children. And what we will be doing and what we are doing is continually reviewing that as we go ahead. So we're kind of in about phase 2 of it at the moment in terms of opening. As I said, we've just got the 2 open at the moment, with others coming on board quite over this year. So certainly over the next year we'll be looking at whether or not it would be cost effective for us to build or buy more homes, or whether or not we do some different things, but we'll continue to review it.
Yes.
I think the reason that we're doing what we're doing with Barnardo's is for our really hard to place children with really complex issues. So there's a really shortage of those really complex places out there. So the market's not there. That's why we've got our own. But I think also for us, our way forward, not that I'm saying the independents don't do it, but would be to settle the children and look to move them on into more family-based arrangements, because that's where every child should be, with a family, not anywhere else. So we are looking at working with those really, really complex children that just couldn't be in a family situation, but working with them with a view to putting them into a family arrangement as soon as they're ready. So it just enables us to keep a more concentrated view on those children that we're looking after, the complexities, and where we may need additional resources or not. So it's just really so we've got a more in-house grip on the children that we're looking after.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Hunt.
Thanks. This follows on from the questions that Mr. Frisbee's asked. It seems to beg the question, when your new financial controls come in, they're going to look at this and they're going to say, well, you're spending all this money on appeals, which you're losing. Why do we actually go through with appeals when we know we're going to lose them? I'm sure there's an answer to this, and so I think Deborah Taylor's got it already, but
yeah, absolutely right. So we are looking at that. I think what we do need to be clear about is that when we go to tribunal, we do go to tribunal because we think we've made the right decision. So we're not kind of going to tribunal just to test our luck to see whether we. So at the moment we are going to tribunal because we think we have made the right decision. What we do need to then look at is that the tribunal is ruling essentially that we didn't make the right decision. So therefore it's a much more complex answer than just not going to tribunal. I think we have to look earlier on at what we can do to either mediate or do things differently, or indeed work better with children and families. So it's not quite a matter of saying, well, we're just not going to go to tribunal because we don't win. Actually, we're going to tribunal because we think we're right, and it's the way to resolve, it's the current way to resolve conflict. Actually, what we need to do is look at a better way of resolving the conflict and doing things earlier on with children and families.
Mr. Martin.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, if we're losing 94%, what thematic analysis is happening to ensure that you know the belief that we have the right position? We have been in them figures now for years. Surely when you're above 90% loss rate, there has to be a sense of reflection on maybe our position that we believe isn't the correct one, and that therefore we should not be taking them there. I understand about earlier intervention, I understand about mediation, but is there a self-reflection on actually we may be getting our position wrong because we're losing 94% of them?
Yeah, absolutely right. So that was the bit I was meaning around doing something earlier, because there's something about, so we have done an analysis of what we know where the majority of our tribunals are, and we know where we lose the majority across the board, but we know where the majority of our tribunals come from. So the majority of our tribunal requests come from where we refuse to assess. So there are two options. One is that, and this is national, so this isn't happening more to Leicestershire than it is to any other local authority. This is across the board. Our figures were a bit higher than national, but not a lot higher than national. So it could be that the tribunal system isn't quite working right and isn't quite making the right decisions. That could be an issue, not suggesting that is. Or you're absolutely right, we need to do a thematic analysis to say, if we're losing the majority of tribunals around request to assess, do we just bite the bullet and request and assess everybody? We then have to weigh that up with the resource that it would take to assess everybody who wants an EHCP to have an EHCP, which is my point around the earlier working, because actually it's almost not practicable for us to assess every single child that requests an EHCP. We would want to understand, is that the right process? Is there anything else that we can do? All of that. That was my point to the kind of earlier work or the earlier thinking. But you're absolutely right. We're not ignoring it and ploughing ahead and saying, yeah, we're just going to keep going at it. We need to understand it, and we are looking in more detail at it.
Thank you for that. I suppose my worry with it is that when we have that obviously difficult decision between resources and saying yes to assessments, which is obviously very difficult decisions that panels make, the two-step test of the Children and Families Act is if someone may have SEND and if that may be affecting their education, that what we are doing by making that resource versus assessment decision at panel is creating a two-tier system within society, whereby the parents that have the nous to go to tribunal and the intellectual or social support or capacity to be able to attend and go to a legal requirements are getting what they want because they win. And there are parents out there that maybe do not have that ability, the background, the social support or the economic ability to do it, that are then just getting the no's because of resources. And that creates in Leicestershire a system whereby if you have the ability to go to tribunal, your child will get what they want. But if you don't, your child won't.
Yeah, I think that was my point about pointing at whether tribunals are the right process. That was my point. I absolutely agree. I think, and sorry, I was probably clumsy in my language around the impact on resources. What we need to do is make sure that the right children get an assessment. So those children that require an educational health and care plan assessment need to be assessed. What we know is that at the moment we don't have the current capacity across nationally to undertake the number of assessments that we're doing. So it's even more important to make sure that the right children get assessments. I don't think the tribunal space is the right space for that for exactly the reasons that you set out. But actually it's not a fair process for all the reasons you've set out, which is why we need to look more closely at how we work with parents to make sure that we are meeting their needs in the right way. And education, health and care plans aren't always the right way for children. There are other ways to provide the support for children, and we need to make sure that we're doing that in the right way. And where children do need an education, health and care plan assessment, we do undertake those assessments for children. And I don't think the tribunal space is always the right space to do that for all the reasons that you've set out.
Right, thank you. We've had quite a discussion on that and we've still got quite a lot to do on the MTFS. I appreciate everybody's point of view and I thank them for it. But Mrs. Allen and Mrs. Lewis, you had your hand up?
Yes, I do, Chair, but if you want to move on, that's fine.
Please, if it's to do with this part of the MTFS, please ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's really just building on that assessment conversation, really. I think there's still some work to do in supporting both schools and parents and carers around it is an application for an education healthcare needs assessment. It's not an application for an education and healthcare plan, and that there are two distinct aspects. And I think I understand the challenges around making sure that you're using the resource appropriately, but the reality is until you've done the assessment, the local authority doesn't know if a child requires an education and healthcare plan. So absolutely, again, understand the challenges around educational psychologist capacity nationally. I would question the the effectiveness of seeking to kind of turn off the tap at assessment stage. I think the more thorough and accurate assessments are, the more parents and carers can be reassured that their children's needs have been identified correctly and appropriate strategies determined. I think the driver from parents and carers comes around securing provision and having that clear so that they can work with the school proactively. And I also think we lose sight of the fact that an education and healthcare plan doesn't always have to have a significant financial cost. It doesn't have to have a one-to-one learning support assistant or a teaching assistant. It doesn't have to have additional financial resource. It can actually specify the strategies and the ways of working that schools can successfully implement without cost. But yet it's still important that those needs and strategies are identified in the legal framework of an education and healthcare plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lewis. Right, if it's okay, we'll move on through the rest of the MTFS. And we're now going to page 25 to 28, paragraphs 81 to 82. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. So moving to the dedicated schools grant for 24-25, the dedicated schools grant remains calculated in those 4 separate blocks. So the schools block, which is an estimated 520 million, which consists of the school formula funding and school growth areas, the central services block of 3.9 million, the high needs block of 108 million, and the early years estimated of 63 million as well. So moving to the schools block, the school funding continues to be delivered through the national funding formula, which funds all pupils at the same rate, irrespective of which authority those children are educated. Within the national funding formula, only the per pupil entitlement is universal to all. There are other factors that reflect the instance of additional needs, such as deprivation and low prior attainment. And therefore funding levels between local authorities and individual schools within those local authorities may well vary as a result of those different pupil characteristics rather than national funding levels. Local authorities do remain responsible for setting their own local funding formula. The DfE have established significant restrictions and only minimal movements from the national funding formula are allowed. In Leicestershire, the funding formula does reflect the national funding formula with 2 exceptions. Firstly, around pupil numbers and subsequent pupil funding protections, and the second is around the projection, for those schools affected by age range changes and some funding for schools required to rent either premises or playing fields. So the 24-25 settlement is at 521 million, with schools being guaranteed a minimum increase per pupil of 0.5%. Additionally, within the schools block, local authorities do receive funding for the initial revenue costs of commissioning additional primary and secondary school places. The DfE have very recently changed the funding methodology for this, and this in turn has required a new policy to be adopted, which links the payment rates received with the grant allocation to the payments made to schools. The grant is 2.8 million and will need to meet the cost of school growth that is currently within the system and not fully completed, as well as school expansions undertaken from September 2024. Once the new places for September 24 have been confirmed, these will be combined with the revised expectations on when the new schools arriving from housing growth will open, which means that we will need to access the full call on the grant. It does remain possible for local authorities to transfer up to 0.5% of the schools block to the high needs block, following consultation with the schools forum and approval with schools, and then the approval of schools forum. No such transfer is proposed for 425, although there is growing pressure from the Department for Education as part of the Delivering Better Value programme for us to undertake or consider this in future years. In terms of the school funding formula, the provisional schools block settlement was issued in July 2023, and members will be aware that there was a subsequent update in October 23 in which the DfE stated that there'd been an error in calculating pupil forecasts. This did result in reduced per pupil allocation for a number of schools across the country, and to make sure that the settlement continued to deliver a minimum per pupil level increase of 0.5%. The national funding formula does set out a minimum amount of funding per pupil, and we've put that in paragraph 88 for you to see. The schools that remain on the funding floor are vulnerable to changes of the future levels of DfE projections. We've got 40 schools in Leicestershire that remain on the funding floor, and at the 0.5% per pupil budget allocation increase, it doesn't reflect the current inflationary pressure on these schools, and some of those will encounter some real terms decrease in funding. So the other challenge is that whilst the national funding formula for schools is based on the 2023 school census, funding that comes into local authorities is actually based upon the pupil characteristics recorded in the 2022 school census, which means that there is, if there is any increase in pupils who are eligible for additional funding, so for example, free school meals, it's unfunded and could result in it not being possible to meet the cost of fully delivering the national funding formula from the schools block. We are looking at the impact of this once the data from the 2023 census has been fully processed. We are required to submit our full funding formula to the SFA by mid-January this year. Moving on to the high needs block, the structure for the high needs funding formula is unchanged from last year, and the provisional settlement is 108 million. It's a 3% increase per head of population. Leicestershire remains at funding floor, so the application of the high needs funding formula would generate a lower settlement without this protection. The national funding formula remains unresponsive to changes in the overall SEND population as well. There's no indication at all whether the high needs national funding formula will be reviewed, and although there's an expectation of national tariffs arising from the SEND and Alternative Provision Action Plan, there's no indication of timescales for any of the associated funding changes. And the only reference made within the settlement recently is that by the end of the 2025, the Department of Education will have made progress towards introducing a national framework of banding and price tariffs. So it's unlikely that any funding structure, and indeed the method by which local authorities are funded before the 2027 financial year, will take place. We've detailed already the cost reduction savings totaling 41 million, which are built into the MTFS, and they fall into those two key areas. So increasing the number of local specialist school places and our transforming SEND and inclusion programme in Leicestershire. On page 30 at paragraph 95, we've detailed the savings or the kind of cost reductions across the Transforming SEND and Inclusion programme, and you can see that they rise to about 27 million over the period of the MTFS. However, despite all of that, the forecast position on the high needs element of the dedicated schools grant remains a significant challenge. And you can see on page 31, we've set out the position of the high needs block over the period of the MTFS. And you can see about a third of the way down, the funding gap before savings is about 23 million next year. After savings, we still have a gap of 16 million next year, which creates a cumulative deficit next year of 65 million on the high needs block, rising to 110 million over the period of the MTFS. At the moment, local authorities are required to carry forward any dedicated schools grant that's as an unusable reserve through the use of statutory accounts override, and we can only now contribute to the dedicated schools grant with the approval of the Secretary of State. It's really significant because the accounts override legislation is confirmed, only confirmed until March 2026, when it is expected to end. And unless further legislative changes from this point take place, local authorities will be required to make financial provision for the deficit, which in Leicestershire it totals 110 million. We do know, and it's recognised nationally, that funding alone will not address the financial difficulties, many of which have created a system where schools and parental expectations have significantly greater influence, but also in this need to meet needs as well. We do have a challenge around affordability of provision and appropriate provision as well. There is a national change programme which is seeking to deliver some change in the long term, but there are no short or medium term solutions that can address this financial challenge that we have, and indeed we have in Leicestershire. at the continued levels of expected growth, the financial position on the high needs block is completely unsustainable and puts the council finances in a significantly challenging position. Moving on to the Central Schools Services block, the Central Services block funds a number of school-related expenditure items such as existing school-based premature retirement costs and the like. The 24-25 settlement is 3.9 million. The early years block, the DfE have announced additional early years dedicated schools grant to extend the entitlement. So in addition to the entitlement of 15 hours for 3 and 4 year olds, the existing 2-year-old entitlement as well, there'll be an expansion of to include 15 hours of free childcare for eligible children of working parents, and that will start from April 2024, and that's expanding to 2-year-olds, and in September 24, from September 24, for children aged between 9 months and 2 years old. Again, Chair, I'll pause there.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do apologise for the extended line of inquiry, but I won't ask any other questions in any other place today. So my questions in total are around the table on page 30 about the reduction in starts and costs. So I've got 2 lines of inquiry. First starts with the early years, so I'll start with that and then maybe get a sort of response. Then I've got another set, if that's okay, if you'll allow me that. Just before that, though, I'd just like to say that I think there's maybe a £760,000 error in the table in the bottom right-hand corner where the 380 is a plus, not a minus. Just seeing if that was an error. And in all of this, of what I'm going to ask, I'd really like to consider the impact on the tribunals as what we, what we were saying earlier on about trying to reduce them. So first of all, the reduction in number of early years specialist starts, a reduction of £587,000 starting in 2024. The early years specialist starts are obviously the most profoundly disabled children within our county. And these, take a class that I sort of know of as a chair of governors in a special school. These are the children with complex brain injuries, complex epilepsy, profound and multiple learning disabilities, PEG feedings, JEDG feedings, tracheostomies, ventilation. If we are reducing the number of early years specialist starts for these children to a tune of £587,000, that isn't a saving. What that is you need a double entry on that bookkeeping to increase the cost to that value in the mainstream classrooms, because these children don't disappear. So if you've got, say, 50 of these children that aren't now going to special schools, these have got to go to mainstream schools. And if they go into mainstream schools, not only will they cost the equivalent cost, they'll also cost quite a bit of capital, because the requirement will be that these mainstream schools now have changing places, hoists. They'll have the training within the support staff to deal with complex epilepsy, to deal with complex brain injuries, degenerative conditions, medical conditions, that sort of thing. So I'd just like to understand that how is that a saving in terms of the 587,000, obviously over the 4 years, rising up to 2.5 million nearly, and what impact that'll have on our mainstream classrooms and what we're going to be doing about it to improve the facilities and expenditure within the mainstream classrooms as these children inevitably need to be looked after in them classrooms. My second line of inquiry is separate, so I'll just pause there to discuss the little ones.
Yeah, so just to be really, really clear, where children need specialist provision, they will be placed in specialist provision. So to be absolutely crystal clear, where their education, health and care plan assesses their needs as needing specialist provision, those children will access specialist provision. So the savings line here is about looking at those children who don't need specialist provision and whose needs could be met elsewhere. So essentially what we've done as part of the diagnostic is had a look at all of the children in specialist provision. And what we found out through talking to schools, talking to parents, talking to children, is that there are a number of children who are currently in provision who potentially could have had their needs met elsewhere. So we're certainly not talking about moving children. What we're talking about is making sure at the point at which we're looking, so they've had their education, health and care plan assessment, and that assessment says their needs can only be met in specialist provision, they will go to specialist provision. So in terms of the reductions, what we know is that there are some children who don't need specialist provision, some early years children who do not need specialist provision, their needs can be met in mainstream. It's those children that will no longer go to specialist provision because they don't need to. So we won't be moving any children. We will not be putting any children in schools where they cannot have their needs met. Those children early years children who need to be in special provision will still get a place at special provision, and they will have all of that support that you've set out. So this isn't about looking at how we can, kind of shoehorn children into provision. This is about making sure children are placed in the right provision to meet their needs. Where we need to make adaptations at mainstream schools, we will make adaptations. If their needs can be met in mainstream schools, we will with adaptations, and we'll look flexibly at how we can meet provision. But this certainly isn't about saying where children need special provision, they will no longer be going there. Absolutely key.
Yeah, just I struggle to deal with the early years section of this because these are the most profound children that start in special schools. I understand as they grow older, some of the children that sort of transfer over, but I suppose that's just my personal view of it. In terms of the accounting, has the 587 reduction, in terms of if you credit the asset, you're going to debit the line above of reduced mainstream EHCP costs, has that 587 hit the above accounting line and that's been built in?
Yes, yeah, so yeah, it's hugely complex in terms of working through, but yeah, absolutely. So what we know is that where children's needs don't need to be met in mainstream school, in specialist provision, of course they'll go to some sort of education provision. So all of the costs are interlinked, and so we're not duplicating and we're not looking at cost avoidance. And just again, to be really clear, because I'm not sure I was clear enough around the early years, where children have early, and I absolutely agree with you, our early years cohort are the most important cohort to get right. Where their needs need to be met at specialist provision, they will be met at specialist provision. We're not changing that. We're absolutely clear. We are looking at how we best need to meet the needs of those children with special educational needs and disabilities. Where they need to be met in specialist provision, they will go to specialist provision from an early age. So it's not about fudging and moving children wherever they need to be. This is about looking at where can those needs best be met for those children with complex needs whose needs need to be met in specialist provision. They will be met in specialist provision.
I suppose for us the difficulty is that the early years specialist starts covers such a vast range of children. That's the problem that, so you're mentioning those ones that are profoundly disabled, that have really difficult learning, but there's lots of children at the other end that are still classed as within that cohort of children. So there's just, such a wide spectrum of children within that specialist area. So it's not just, from what I see, you're focusing on that really profound specialist need. There's lots of children at the other end as well. So I suppose just to widen the eyes a little bit more, that there are a mixture of children within that cohort.
I think I understand and agree with you as the children get older, but knowing firsthand, working as a children's nurse, the people that do start special schools at 5 generally are quite profoundly disabled, just in terms that I don't think that spectrum is really there at 5 years of age from personal experience. But I'm happy to move on from that and see it as a sort of difference in opinion on it. The second point is the reduction, again, the accounting of the reduction in non-early years specialist starts. So what we're saying is 1.3 million are going to not start in specialist school throughout their journey. We're not putting them back into mainstream. We're talking about what we're going to do from now on. 587,000 aren't starting early years. Them two are both going to have a profound effect on the mainstream EHCP costs, because these children are staying in mainstream, or the earliest children are now in mainstream. The mainstream EHCP cost line of minus 345,000 includes 1.3 million and 587,000. There will be some savings in the 1.3 million due to higher needs cost in independent special schools, but that rises over the years to a really profound reduction in reduced mainstream EHCP costs if you are accounting for these children not going to special school. So what's happening in mainstream is you're going to have more children in mainstream that would have gone to special that you say didn't need to. We're not going to send a lot of children into special schools during their school career, i.e. from mainstream. So therefore, the mainstream cohort in classrooms are going to have a lot more disabled children, and because previously we've transferred them out into either ISPs, into other special schools, or into early years area special schools. So the pressure that's going to be put onto the mainstream sector, which this accounting is all considered for, is then going to have to deal with a huge reduction in itself, because obviously the reduced DHCP mainstream costs has got them in, and itself a reduction in its own cost line. The pressure on mainstream classrooms this is going to cause from both early years starts of more profound children, plus not sending children over to ISPs or to other special schools, is going to put such a strain and stress on the mainstream special needs department. Are we prepared for that? Do we have the support within special in mainstream schools? Is there the LSAs? Is there the TAs ready for this? Because if we're going to not send these children over, the children still exist in both the early years and after that, the pressure that's going to lead to in mainstream schools is quite profound. What are we putting in these schools? Yes, okay, we're not sending them because they can be met in mainstream, but currently they're going, so they're actually going to stay in mainstream. So there's going to be a massive pressure on the mainstream classrooms over the next few years due to these sort of figures and plans.
Okay, so just first of all, for absolute clarity, this table isn't taking money, so it's not that, it's about how we spend the money differently. Okay, so we're not going to remove £9 million worth of money from various providers. This is about how we fund packages of support for children. At the heart of this is about making sure children are in the right provision. So there will be no children placed in provisions that cannot meet need. So those children with multiple complex needs whose needs be met in specialist provision will have their needs met in specialist provision. So part of the challenge we've got at the moment is that within mainstream school, we actually have a number of children whose needs need to be met in specialist provision. We can't get them into specialist provision because we don't have space in specialist provision. And what we also know is within specialist provision, there are some children who could have their needs met in mainstream school. So this is about getting the right children in the right place that can meet their needs. So we won't see an increase in the number of children who are in mainstream schools, because those children are already in our mainstream schools, some of which have then come out into specialist provisions, some of which will remain in mainstream school. So it's a slight complexity of the financial figures versus the work that we're doing collectively about making sure that we can meet children's needs. So this isn't the money that will end up being kind of taken out as such. This is about us spending our money very differently and making sure that we are those children who need specialist provision, who need independent provision, who need units in schools, are placed in those provisions. Where children can have their needs met in schools, provision will be paid into those schools to either support those children, or those children's needs will be met through ordinarily available provision. So at the heart of this is about getting children into the right provision. And what we know through our diagnostic is that by getting children into the right provision, there are significant cost reductions, because at the moment we have a number of children in really quite high cost placements whose needs don't need to be met within high cost placements. So part of it is about getting the right children. So please don't look at this as if we're kind of really taking money out of the system. This is about making sure the right children are supported in the right provision in the right way. So at the moment, a lot of the placement budget within the high needs grant goes into mainstream schools to provide either additional support, resource to support those children, kind of different provisions, all sorts of things. None of that will change. At the heart of this is about making sure children are supported in the right place.
I completely understand that point, and I'll finish on this. But it's cheaper in lower provision because the children are less disabled there, and therefore, when you hold the children that would have gone to the ISPs, there's no saving other than the ISPs. I understand that there's a saving in ISP costs, but they transfer onto a different line, because if they're not going to a special school, their cost doesn't go down by going to mainstream, because to give section F, whether it be in a special school, a unit or a mainstream, it costs the same amount of money because the level of complexity is now in a mainstream classroom. There's no saving there. All there is the saving from the ISPs, from my understanding of it. So that's my confusion around the level of saving, because all it is transferring the child from one school to another. It deals with sufficiency. I completely agree it deals with sufficiency, but it doesn't deal with cost saving, because you're transferring a child from one to another, not retrospectively, proactively, but the cost doesn't reduce. Delivering section F in a special school disregarding ISP or delivering Section F in a mainstream school is the same cost. So it's just it deals with sufficiency, I grant you, but I don't believe it deals with this level of savings, and that's what I wanted to sort of unpick. And I'll leave it there. And just the final point: how do you feel all of this will impact tribunals?
So just on the cost stuff, just to be really clear, the cost doesn't always equal the complexity. So what we know at the moment is we've got a number of children in really high cost private provision that doesn't reflect the complexity of need. So the savings are around delivering the right resource in the right place. So the way in which we will spend less money is by spending less money on costly private provision, and still meeting needs. So that's partly what we need to remember. It's not equal cost. It's quite significantly different within the private sector, and complexity doesn't always equal cost as well. In terms of the tribunals, again, I think it's a really, really important point. So this fits absolutely with the issues around tribunals and making sure that we can meet needs. So a big chunk of the work within the Transforming Centred Inclusion programme has been about how we can work really proactively with parents and carers in identifying the right provision for their children. And that was the point I was making earlier around tribunals and thinking about how we can engage early, have some conversations about how we can best meet needs. Now, what we know through the Transforming Centred Inclusion programme is that where we've done that and where we've had conversations with parents about how we can best meet needs, actually we've been successful at placing those children without then going to tribunal as well. So you're absolutely right, there's a huge link here to possible tribunals, but another element of the Transforming Centred Inclusion programme has been around the kind of setting specific planning work, which is about working collectively with parents and carers and children about making sure that they get their best possible needs met as well. So it absolutely links to tribunals in terms of the joint work.
Can I just come back on one point, please? No, that's fine. So the saving, that's fine. I won't ask any more questions after this one. I won't ask any more questions. So I agree with you, the savings on the ISPs, the high cost places, but that isn't there in early years. So the savings of 587,000 rising to 2.4, you ain't bringing anyone back from an ISP there. The cost is identical. So there's no saving because it deals with sufficiency, but it doesn't deal with saving. The ISPs, the 13, 14, 15-year-olds, completely agree. But the young ones, there's no savings in not going. There's only a sufficiency element.
Yeah, sorry, no, just should I respond to that quickly? Yeah, you're absolutely right. So these are around cost avoidance as well. So all of these projections around cost avoidance. So where we place a child in the right provision that isn't a specialist setting, we will avoid the specialist provision costs, and that's what's built into here. So it's cost avoidance. There is no plans within the programme to move children from provision. These are about avoiding costs going forward by assessing the needs right.
Thank you very much. We're now moving on. We're still on the MTFS, and we'll move on now to page. Oh, right.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I asked a question earlier on about the deficit and where that was in the Appendix A, and I'm looking now at is it page 31. Can the officers be clear? I think I can see the line, but which line we're looking at in the deficit, which is frequently quoted, and are we currently obliged to solve the deficit by 2026? I think there's so presumably in 2027 we'll get a huge amount of money to pay off our deficit. I really do think that there's one or two things where we need better information, particularly from Newton Europe, about the questions that Mr. Martin's raised, as an aside. Yeah, well, I know, but I just thought I'd get that in to save you time later. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of clarity around the line, if you look at page 31, and if you go down the left-hand column, you'll see a line that reads cumulative high needs funding gap. That's the line that we refer to in terms of our cumulative high needs funding gap. In terms of the 2026 statutory override, if that goes ahead, then the 110 million deficit would fall to the local authority books for us to cover. We wouldn't be given 110 million, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Still moving on. I'd like now to move on to my piece of paper. Yeah, I think it's page 32, and it's the 32 to 34 paragraphs 103 to 111, and it's the capital programme. So you're going to need throat tablets soon, Jane, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to the capital programme, the proposed Children and Family Services capital programme totals 89.8 million. The programme continues to focus upon the delivery of additional primary and secondary school places, and also additional places to be delivered to support the Transforming Send and Inclusion programme as well. You can see in paragraph 104, we've set out the different amounts allocated to each of those elements as well. In relation to the provision of additional school places, there's an investment of 63 million over the period of the MTFS. The SEND programme investment of 13.9 million, and then there are some other capital elements, and we've detailed what they are in paragraphs 107. In terms of funding sources, we've set out in the table at paragraph 108 where the funding sources for the capital programme are, and both in terms of the external grant, but also the developer section 106 contributions as well. The basic need grant is received from the DFE. It's based on the need to create additional school places, and you can see the confirmed grants that we've got for 24-25 and 25-26. We also have a strategic maintenance grant as well, and we built in an assumption of 2 million for that per year. And then we also have section 106 contributions as well, and we've estimated that they will total around about 29.4 million over the period for the proposed programme, which includes 9.1 million in 24-25. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody have any questions, comments they'd like to make on this item? Right. I think we've now finished the MTFS, and we'll move on to item 9 on the agenda, page 43 to 54. Transforming Send and Inclusion in Leicestershire, the TISL programme. And who's taking us through that? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. We've just got a changeover of.
Sorry, we'll just change over and invite the representatives from Newton Europe. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be most helpful. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Stephen Knight. I'm a partner at Newton who's been working with Leicestershire on the Transforming Send and Inclusion programme.
Afternoon, Chair and everyone. My name is Ashley Page. I also work for Newton Europe, and I've been working on the Transforming Send and Inclusion in Leicestershire programme as well.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take us through the paper, and the purpose of this report is to give an update to the committee on the Transforming Send and Inclusion programme, and it's since the last time we gave a report and update with my colleagues on the 7th of March 2023. The financial benefits of the medium-term financial strategy position have been talked through at length on here, so I won't go through those in too much more detail. You've just a reminder that the increasing demand in the SEND system is been there to affect the financial position of the high needs block, as we've detailed, and the ability to deliver the statutory assessment deadlines, and also to note that we've had noted previously between 2016 and 20 there was a 54% increase in the number of children with requiring an education and healthcare plan, and this compared to the national increase over the same period of time, which was England 38% and the East Midlands 32%. At the same time, the funding has not increased in line with this local trend, and the trend continues through 21, 20 and 22, and a further 38% growth in the number of children supported with an education and healthcare plan throughout that. This increase in demand has obviously caused a drift and delay in the Special Educational Needs Assessment Department for Leicestershire, which we refer to as SENA. Just a reminder that in August 2022, the department embarked on a new change programme, and we worked with our partners, Newton Europe, to take us through to a diagnostic position. The diagnostic position identified that for the delivery of the programme, it's structured around four areas: inclusive practice, the service transformation, accurate information, and communication and engagement. Throughout the programme, the four work streams of areas have been connected and underpinned a set of principles identified in paragraph 21. So that's to maintain a focus on children and young people. No one person or organisation can solve the problems alone. Shift to a mindset of collective responsibility, work in genuine partnership, foster good working relationships, improved and honest communications, define roles and responsibilities, set clear expectations, make transparent and robust decisions, and support children and young people early and close to their home. The remainder of the document looks at the progress that we've made in transforming SEND and inclusion during the second half of 2023. So we've now moved into the implementation sustainability phase, which was the improvements that were made on the design phase and rolled out to the relevant teams and across the stakeholder system. The changes are sustainably embedded and by tracking and driving measurable progress in each of the areas. With the majority of the work streams, they've been entered into the implementation at the start of this academic year, which was in September 23, and the Transforming Centred Inclusion programme is starting to have an impact as outlined in the specific areas of work. However, we do know that there's still significant improvements to be made for many children and families and education providers. And that is in part due to the fact that we've got the number of changes required and due to the size of changes taking place all at one point. So in the service transformation in 2023, the SENA service underwent a reset. It was formally aligned into locality teams and has been moved into 3 discrete teams, one to look at assessment, one to look at reviews, and one to look at placements. 5 of the design work streams were implemented simultaneously through this reset of the SENA service, with a significant training and onboarding to the new tools and the ways of working taking place throughout the autumn term. This has impacted on productivity and therefore the timeliness. The improvements since we've only been in place since September for the first few months of the reset, the reviews and the review throughput continually increases week on week, and all aspects of the assessment have completed within statutory timeframes, but that does exclude those on requesting the advice. This has increased the overall assessment timeliness completed within 20 weeks from a 0 position to 11%. We do acknowledge that there are still many children in the families, with cases long overdue, and the progress shows that the timeliness will continue with improvements over time. The impact on outcomes and trials taking place during the design phase of the programme have highlighted the importance of earlier and meaningful conversations with parents and schools during the education and healthcare plan process to ensure clarity of consensus and suitable placement options. This refers to the conversation we were having earlier on the back of the questions, that the SENA staff have received a proportionate amount of training and signposting to supporting schools, such as the Inclusive Practice Toolkit, which is where we're making sure that our school providers are fully versed of that, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. And that the SEND provision in Leicestershire, a spill guidance has been developed for parents to understand when they have an agreement for a specialist placement, they're able to give those places appropriately and in a more efficient manner than was previously. There's been an impact on communication. Improving communication was another key driver of the transforming centred inclusion work and has been a big part of the SENA reset. The new ways of working, focusing on proactive communication with schools and parents around every aspect of the process. Again, this has not been perfect. However, we've started to see some feedback that this is starting to have a real impact across the stakeholder system. There has been an impact on staff. The pressure within the SEND system has also been felt within the staff within the LCC system, particularly those working in the SENA department. And a further focus on the benefits of the SENA reset is giving staff a greater clarity on their roles and what their expectations are. This is beginning to have a positive impact within the SENA staff, and case managers are starting to speak passionately about all the recent all-system events where they've been able to share their impacts on the work that they're doing within the service. As part of the programme, the council has worked with the Leicestershire Centre, with school leaders and other stakeholders to develop a guide and directory to show the different comparisons of different types of educational settings. As mentioned previously, this is the SPIL directory, and it's designed to help parents and carers choose certain settings or provisions for their child or young person and be able to compare what they can offer, but also to make other professionals and interested single parties as to be a single source of communication to refer to. It is intended to be used alongside other information such as the local offer and the inclusive practice toolkits, which was also a product of the Transforming SEND and Inclusion work. The guide and directory are not legal, and it is acknowledged that this directory doesn't constitute the only guide, and directives towards other educational setting types are available in Leicestershire. Managers in the Centre service are now reviewing their KPIs on a weekly basis to ensure that there's strong oversight to the current performance and to identify any concerns or emerging risks and to put in place actions to ensure mitigations and improvements. There is much more of a strong sense of using data for data discussions and data outcome actions as well. The Inclusive Practice Toolkit was created because it was clear from the design group that the people require support to navigate the SEND system successfully. It outlines the process of the provision for the children and young people in the SEND system and provides a framework to talk about all the provision that's available. The toolkit has been trained to both staff internally to Leicestershire County Council and colleagues within the education system. The web pages visited show that there have been 4,000 times that's been reviewed during the autumn term, and a sample of the SENCO showed that 50% of them had already been using it to support their work. Alongside this, there is a work stream that has been come into place around setting specific planning that's also been implemented, and this shows where we can identify support and high challenge for those targeted group of schools and trusts who their data indicates to us that they would benefit from the support to improve their inclusive practices in making children feel part of their school system. Accurate information has been a focus of the improvements that we've been doing on the Transforming SEND and Inclusion since September. The workflows have been redesigned and updated in line with the new ways of working, increasing the accuracy of both the operational and financial data captured. The engagement and co-production of the co-design within the system and partners has been another focus part of the work. As noted, there's been a lot of collaboration in terms of partnership in the core principles of the Transforming SEND and Inclusion, and this has fostered really good working relationships. Throughout the programme, there's been a focus on providing regular updates, both internal to the Leicestershire County Council and external to other providers. In paragraph 39, there is a key relationship that has been developed with the Leicestershire SEND Hub and has also been a key focus for the activity of Transforming SEND and Inclusion. This has supported all phases of the programme, has led to a number of co-produced activities, and the work with the SEND Hub has aligned with the other activities that are taking place around the Accelerated Progress Plan, which is looking at the written statement of action, outcomes for improving educational healthcare plans, and also the emerging work through the Department for Education Change Programme that has contributed to the strengthening and maturity of the Council's relationship with the SEND Hub as a strategic partner. Next steps. Whilst there's been positive progress, there's still a lot of recognition and that there's a lot of work to do, particularly around communication, which will be an ongoing programme, improving the timeliness and the quality of educational healthcare plans, and the Transforming SEND and Inclusion programme will continue to drive and embed the current improvements into 2024 and has considered the SEND system Leicestershire and will also consider how the SEND system in Leicestershire can go further with new opportunities and improve and be able to manage the grant allocation more appropriately. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alison. Would either of the gentlemen like to make any comments before I open it up to discussion? No, that's fine. Before I open it up to discussion from my fellow colleagues, I'm just curious as to why, and I'm looking at page 45, paragraph 16, why we were nearly 20% more increase, an increase of number of children of over 20% according to in comparison with the rest of the East Midlands. And and 16% against the whole of the country. I mean, those are huge, quite a lot of figures. And so I'm just wondering, are we special? Are we unusual? Are we unique? I just wonder.
I'd like to think that we are unique, but unique for the right reasons. I think the answer to that is not straightforward. There are many reasons why we've got a lot of legacy sort of provisions, that legacy decisions that have led to the fact that we've not had the right sufficiency in the system. We've got a position whereby some of our schools want to make sure that they are moving forward to get an education and healthcare plan, to get the right funding back into the schools. So the answer to that question is many, many and varied, but the move towards having a much lower request for the wrong reasons, but having the request right for the right reasons for education and healthcare plans does sit at the core of the Transforming SEND and Inclusion work.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just very briefly add to Alison's answer on that. So definitely agree with that. The only perspective I'd add is nationally, you won't be surprised to hear that most local areas are going through a very similar growth in demand and spend on that. And certainly the starting point from the analysis I've seen is quite different for those different authorities based on those legacy decisions that have been made sometimes 10 years ago in local practices and cultures and ways of working. But it's not atypical with some other areas.
Right, thank you very much. I'm now opening it up to Mr. Hunt and Mr. Frisbee.
I do apologise. Yeah, I'll repeat the question in brief, which is, how is it that you're proposing that we're going to save some money or reduce the deficit when the number of young people in education will not change?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Mr. Hunt. So I don't want to go through all of the discussion which happened earlier on the MTFS section, but the key points I'll draw out on that and the table on page 31, what it will show is that in the situation where improvements to the outcomes that have been achieved for children and young people and the way the system is operating, the continued growth in spend is very, very significant. What the programme, through a tremendous amount of hard work by lots of colleagues in this room and outside of the room, is helped to achieve is significantly reduce what that rate of growth is. What it's not doing is taking that to a level of expenditure below where it is today. It's about reducing it with a couple of really, really key principles at the heart of it. So one is about that left shift of demand for earlier provision. I think the other bit sort of worth pointing out there is all these opportunities where there's that opportunity to provide a better and earlier provision for a child had been identified by practitioners from across the system within that. So it's very genuine looking at those people who are closest to those ways of working to understand how can we do that in a better way. But the key point is this is not about reducing spend from the level it is today, it's about slowing down the rate of growth, which makes it very real money, albeit still a very challenged financial position.
The other thing I would just add is everything the programme is working on is very much focused on what the evidence says can be achieved for individual children and collectively. So I agree there is still a deficit, which is being significantly mitigated, as Steve said, but it's not looking to goal seek what would need to happen in order to make the deficit zero, and therefore back calculating any approach or kind of targets or anything from that. That would be inappropriate and not what the programme is trying to do. Yes, in terms of what we think is feasible to achieve collectively through the programme.
Sure, and then apologies. Aside from that, obviously there are a number of other initiatives which Leicestershire County Council is working on. The Send AP programme had been mentioned, but also other work that the DfE is doing around trying to support local areas within the challenges facing SEND systems as well.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Mrs. Seaton?
Thank you very much, Chair. So, as you've just said, so thank you for the presentation. And as you've just said, the left shift to early year provision is one of the big changes in this. So, when we've still got a deficit, as you said, when could we expect to see results coming from early years I want to say invention then, I've lost the word, intervention, that's it. When could we expect to see that you focusing on early years? Is it 2 years, 3 year, 4 year tracked, or is that impossible to pinpoint?
Thank you for the question. In terms of impact on different ways of working for children in the early year setting, so those changes are already being felt and impacted. As colleagues have already said, that's by no means saying all the work is done and we're not on a continual journey of improvement. And actually, Leicestershire colleagues are also already actively planning and thinking, what is the next phase of improvement that comes after that? Probably worth, I suppose, almost in the language, and apologies if I haven't quite grasped the question right. There's obviously early years, which I think we've all acknowledged is a very important part for children stepping up into reception, but also the earlier intervention cuts across children at all ages. And that really is an ethos which is not just going to apply to early years, but really all children. How are we having those best, most meaningful conversations with parents and carers, having the right tools and provision available early in the setting so that needs don't escalate as much, to avoid both angst and frustration in the system, but also delayed achieving the best outcome for a child.
Thank you for that. So it's not really something that we can measure, is it? As to whether it's improving the situation or not, because it's a moving beast, isn't it? So you can't actually, if standards of education improve, you don't know whether it's because of the early intervention or because of outside influences such as COVID and the cost of living, etc., putting pressures on. So if standards do improve, can we say with any clarity that it's because of the early years intervention that has improved the children's standards in later life? Is it a thing that we can categorically say we were right in doing this?
Yeah, I'll pick it up and then my colleague will come in. I think it's a real challenge, actually, Mrs. Seaton, to monitor any early intervention. So, and we know that across the board around any early intervention. What we know is that if we get it right in the early years, it has a huge impact for children. And we know that because research tells us that getting it right in the early years across the system is really, really important. So if we intervene early, or if we provide the right support early, what we know through various longitudinal studies is that it has the right impact. How we then track that is really difficult, because we then have to kind of forward track all these children. So I think it's really difficult to kind of monitor. But at the heart of it, we know that if we get it right for children early on and we get them in the right provision or with the right support, then they're far likely to be more successful. Just in terms of tracking the kind of benefits or what we want to achieve through the programme, and I know we discussed the table on page 20 of the MTFS report to a great extent. Actually, what this does allow us to do is monitor the kind of financial benefits of getting it right for children as well. So at the heart of the programme, it's about making sure children have their needs met in the right provision at the right time. If we get that right, what we're saying is we will avoid the cost that we've set out on page 30. So one of the ways that we'll know we've got it right is that we've avoided the costs, or we've not seen the growth that we are setting out on page 30. So that's one of the ways in which we know we've been successful. Another way that we know we'll be successful is that a child is thriving in their early years specialist setting and it's meeting their need, or a child is thriving in their early years mainstream setting and it's meeting their need. So there are all sorts of ways of us knowing that we've got it right for children, but it's really, really challenging in terms of early intervention. But I think, as many of our colleagues have said, the importance of getting it right in the early years is kind of really, really really important.
I would just say that a huge focus, as Alison mentioned, of the programme has been improving the kind of data and information that is available on individual children and families to be able to inform both that decision making, but kind of understanding what outcomes people are achieving. So, for example, we're now tracking, it's part of the process to phone parents at certain parts of the assessment process, and that information is so we can tell that we are doing that a higher proportion of the time than we were before. And similarly around timeliness, outcomes, everything else, the level of tracking and clarity is much higher than it was previously.
Thank you. I have just one other question from myself, if that's all right, or comment. Quite rightly, we've discussed in great detail starting young and children with complex needs. But we also have young adults who, and I'm talking maybe from 10 to 17, who have really now suffering from the schooling, and they've lost family members through death during the COVID time, the isolation. Do we, I personally know in a very tight area of 3 or 4 of these children that or young people, and particularly when they're coming into their early teens and the isolation they felt, they missed out virtually on a lot of social interaction and give and take. And we can see that also in the reports of young people, not hopefully so much in Leicestershire or Leicester, but across the country, that are now getting into serious trouble, criminality, but also mentally. Does this programme also look at them? That's what I'd like to.
Yeah, I would link in that whilst we're giving a report and an update on transforming SEND and inclusion as a programme, the whole of my side of the department is on education and SEND. So other matters linked into where you've raised the profile of those young people, aged 10 to 17 and beyond as well, who are not feeling that they belong or feel as included in the school. So that piece of work is being picked up and was picked up as part of the inclusive practice toolkit, and it's also picked up quite specifically in the secondary education inclusion partnership and other reports that we bring to this committee around those children missing out on education. We do have the areas that connect on that. So yes, it is, but obviously it's not been highlighted in great detail in this report.
Right, well, I'd like to thank everybody and our colleagues from Mr. Page and Mr. Knight for joining us today. It's been a very long meeting, but it's been a very productive meeting, I feel. And yes, sorry if Jane, oh, we've still got one more item. Sorry, and that's the colourful one. Let's move on to that, which is the draft Children and Family Service Department plan. And it's on page 55. And Jane, are you taking this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. No, not a problem at all. So the purpose of this report is to overview and scrutiny the draft Leicestershire Children and Family Department Plan for 24 to 26. The department has developed a new draft plan setting out a refreshed vision, our priorities and ambitions for our services. We've identified 3 ambitions. We've identified 10 associated priorities to contribute towards improving outcomes for children, young people and families in Leicestershire. And those improved outcomes around supporting children and young people to build strong foundations, supporting children and young people to be safe and to belong, and supporting children and young people to enjoy and achieve. And we've set out the further detail underneath each of those priorities for the service as well. In terms of consultation, we haven't undertaken formal consultation specifically on the draft plan because we continually and actively engage with our children, young people and families across Leicestershire as part of any of our direct work. So we've utilised a lot of that consultation to sense check against the plan rather than doing any specific engagement activity on the plan. But the plan has been informed by feedback from all of those groups that we've detailed in paragraph 6 from children, young people and their families on their needs and their experiences of services as well. The plan will provide the context within which the department budgets are produced, and the department will continue to ensure it makes the best possible use of resources as well. The draft plan is due to be presented to Cabinet at its meeting on the 9th of February, so any comments from today's meeting would be welcomed and taken into consideration prior to this, and we intend to officially launch the plan in April 2024. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody got any comments they'd like to make? Mr. Taylor, did you want to come back on anything?
I don't think so, Chair, but it's a really good plan and very user friendly and young person focused.
Right. Go back to where I was, running ahead of myself. No, but thank you very much, everybody that attended, taken part in this. It's always a very important one. That all our meetings are important for this, with the MTFS as well. And the date of our next meeting is on Tuesday, the 5th of March at 2 o'clock here again. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. Thank you.